My father waited until 23 people were seated around our Thanksgiving table to slide a stack of legal papers in front of me and say, "Your mother was the biggest mistake of my life. Sign this so I can finally correct it." The room erupted in laughter. My stepmother nodded approvingly. No one said a word in my defense. I signed, without a single word. But here's what my father didn't know. The woman he'd just called a mistake, a failure, the woman he'd humiliated in front of everyone, she was the same lawyer who had written every single contract keeping his $340 million company from collapsing for the past 15 years. And she'd been waiting a very long time to ask him one question. My name is Diana Hartley. I'm 32 years old. This is my story. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. I should probably start by telling you who I am, beyond the daughter who just signed away her inheritance at a holiday dinner. I'm a corporate lawyer at Mitchell & Associates in Boston. It's not a top 10 firm, but it's respected. In 5 years, I've handled 12 M&A transactions, the largest worth $28 million. My colleagues trust me, my clients return. I graduated from Harvard Law in 2018, top 15% of my class. None of that matters when I go home to Connecticut. To my father, Richard Hartley, I am and have always been the daughter from before. That's how he introduces me. Not Diana the lawyer, not my firstborn, just from before. Like I'm a rough draft he'd rather forget. Last Thanksgiving, he introduced me to a business partner this way. "This is Diana, my daughter from, before." He gestured vaguely, as if the details were too tedious to recall. He didn't mention Harvard, he didn't mention my career. The partner smiled politely and moved on to shake Ethan's hand. My half-brother, the one currently getting his MBA at Wharton. Ethan got a full introduction. Accomplishments listed, future plans highlighted, pride unmistakable. I got a wave of the hand and an awkward pause. You'd think after 32 years, I'd stop hoping, stop showing up, stop waiting for him to see me the way he sees them. But every year I told myself, maybe this time will be different. Maybe if I work harder, achieve more, stay quieter, cause no trouble, maybe then he'll finally look at me the way a father should look at his daughter. Maybe then I'll be enough. I know. I can hear how pathetic that sounds. But that's the thing about wanting your parents' love. Logic doesn't apply. And this year, something changed. For the first time in 5 years, my father called me himself. The invitation wasn't what made me hopeful, it was how he said it. "Diana, I'd like you to come home for Thanksgiving this year. It's important." Important. He'd never used that word about anything involving me. I should have known better. I should have remembered all the other times. Like my Harvard Law graduation. May 2018, the biggest day of my academic life. I'd sent the invitation 3 months in advance, called twice to confirm, even offered to arrange his flight from Connecticut to Cambridge. It was only a 2-hour drive, but I wanted to make it easy. He didn't come. "Emergency board meeting," he said. "You understand." I understood. I always understood. What I didn't understand, not until 3 days later, was why his emergency board meeting was happening in Miami. I found out through Instagram of all places. My stepmother Victoria had posted a carousel of photos, the whole family at a rooftop restaurant, ocean views behind them, champagne glasses raised. The caption read, "Celebrating our amazing daughter Sophia's 21st birthday. So proud of this one." Sophia's birthday was the same week as my graduation. He'd chosen a party over my degree. I stared at that photo for a long time. My father's arm around Sophia, both of them laughing, Victoria beaming, Ethan photobombing in the background. A perfect family portrait, with no space for me in the frame. My mother flew in from New York. She sat in the front row at the ceremony, took 47 photos, and cried when they called my name. Afterward, she took me to dinner and said something I still think about. "You know your worth doesn't depend on who shows up, right?" I nodded. I didn't believe her. Not then. But I held on to the words anyway, like a life raft I wasn't sure I'd ever need. The graduation wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. In 2022, my father called asking for a favor. Hartley Maritime, his company, the logistics empire he never lets anyone forget he built, was negotiating a contract with a shipping partner in Singapore. He wanted me to take a quick look at the agreement. I spent 3 evenings reviewing that contract. 42 pages of dense maritime law, cross-referenced with international trade regulations. I found a liability clause that could have cost the company $2.3 million if the deal went sideways. I wrote a 5-page memo explaining the issue and how to fix it. Sent it at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, right before the negotiation deadline. 2 weeks later, the deal closed. The clause was revised. The company was protected. I found out what happened next through a LinkedIn post. My father had given an interview to Connecticut Business Journal. Fortunately, he told them, my legal team at Morrison and Sterling caught the issue in time. That's why you work with the best. No mention of me, not even a thank you text. When I saw him at Christmas that year, Victoria made it worse. We were in the kitchen, and she looked at me with that condescending smile she'd perfected over 15 years of marriage to my father. Diana, I heard you know a little something about law. I thought you just did paperwork or something. I felt my face heat up. I'm a corporate attorney. I specialize in mergers and acquisitions. Oh, she waved her hand dismissively. Well, nothing like the big firms Richard works with. Morrison and Sterling, now that's real legal work. I didn't argue. I never did. But here's what Victoria didn't know, what no one knew yet. Morrison and Sterling. I'd remember that name, and later it would change everything. People ask me why I kept going back, why I kept showing up to holidays where I'd be ignored, dinners where I'd be dismissed, gatherings where my presence seemed to inconvenience everyone. The honest answer? I wasn't just going back for my father. I was going back for my grandparents. Grandpa Harold, 82 now, who always saved me a seat next to him and asked about my cases like they actually mattered. Grandma Margaret, who slipped me extra pie and whispered, "You're doing just fine, sweetheart," when no one else was listening. I was going back for Ethan and Sophia, too. They were spoiled, yes, favored, absolutely, but they were still my siblings. Half-siblings, technically, but I'd watched them grow up. I'd hoped, foolishly maybe, that one day we'd have a relationship that didn't depend on our parents. And I was going back because some small, stubborn part of me still believed my father could change. So when he called in early November and said he wanted me at Thanksgiving, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. I'll be there, I told him. What time should I arrive? 6 o'clock. And Diana, he paused. This year is going to be different. I should have asked what he meant. I should have heard the warning in his voice. Instead, I called my mother to tell her about the invitation. She listened quietly. When I finished, she said, "Go if you want to, sweetheart. But remember, don't let anyone make you forget who you are." That night, I noticed something I hadn't thought about in years. On my mother's desk, there was a stack of files with a familiar logo. Morrison and Sterling LLP. "Mom, do you work on maritime stuff?" I asked. She smiled almost to herself. Something like that. I didn't think much of it. Not then. The drive from Boston to Greenwich takes about 2 hours if traffic cooperates. That Thanksgiving, November 28th, 2024, traffic did cooperate, which meant I had 2 uninterrupted hours to convince myself that everything would be fine. I pulled up to the house at 5:47 p.m., 13 minutes early. The Hartley family estate sat on 2 acres of manicured Connecticut land, a 6,500 square foot colonial that my father had purchased in 2015 for $4.2 million. I know the exact figure because he mentioned it at least once per visit. To him, this house wasn't just a home, it was proof. Proof that he'd made it, that he mattered, that his name meant something. The driveway was already full. BMWs, a Mercedes, a Lexus SUV. I counted at least 8 cars, which meant the guest list had expanded beyond immediate family. When I walked through the front door, I understood why. The foyer was immaculate, fresh flowers, soft lighting, the scent of roasting turkey drifting from the kitchen. In the living room, I counted 23 people, aunts, uncles, cousins I saw once a year. Grandpa Harold waved at me from his armchair. Grandma Margaret blew me a kiss. But there were three faces I didn't recognize. Three men in expensive suits, standing near the fireplace with glasses of scotch, talking to my father with the easy familiarity of business partners. One of them, tall, silver-haired, mid-50s, turned to look at me. His expression flickered with something I couldn't quite read. Recognition? Curiosity? I'd find out later his name was Harold Patterson, vice president at First Harbor Bank, the bank that had loaned Hartley Maritime $45 million. Victoria intercepted me before I could reach my grandparents. Her smile was too wide, too bright. "Diana, you made it. How nice." Something in her voice made my stomach tighten. This was going to be a long night. I tried to shake off the unease. I smiled at relatives, accepted compliments on my dress, made small talk about work. Normal Thanksgiving things. But 20 minutes in, I heard something that stopped me cold. I was near the hallway leading to the powder room when Victoria's voice drifted from the dining room. She was talking to Sophia, both of them bent over the place cards on the table. "Just wait for the main event," Victoria said, her tone dripping with satisfaction. "Your father's been planning this for months." Sophia giggled. "Finally, she won't have any reason to come back after this." "Exactly. Clean break. Richard said it's the last loose end from that situation." Situation. That's what they called my mother's marriage to my father. That's what they called me. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. They hadn't seen me. I forced myself to breathe. What were they planning? What main event? I slipped into the bathroom and locked the door. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. I typed a message to my mother. "Something's wrong. They're planning something. I'll call you later." Her response came in seconds. "I'm here. Whatever happens, remember who you are." I stared at those words. Then I stared at myself in the mirror, a 32-year-old woman in a burgundy dress, trying not to panic at a family dinner. I could leave. Right now. Get in my car, drive back to Boston, and never look back. But if I did that, they'd say I was dramatic, oversensitive, just like her mother. No, I was going to stay. I was going to find out what this main event was. After all, how much worse could it get? I wish I hadn't asked that question. I returned to the living room with a glass of wine I didn't plan to drink. Liquid courage, or at least something to hold on to. The table was set for 24. White linen, Wedgwood china, crystal glasses that caught the candlelight. Every detail curated to project success, taste, generational wealth. My father's favorite performance. I found my place card between Cousin Marcus, who sold insurance in Hartford and always smelled like cigars, and Aunt Patricia, who hadn't spoken to me since I accidentally spilled punch on her at my father's second wedding. Perfect placement. Far from the head of the table, where Richard sat flanked by Victoria and the three businessmen. As I took my seat, I scanned the room. Grandpa Harold caught my eye and gave me a small nod. Grandma Margaret smiled. Ethan was on his phone, uninterested. Sophia kept glancing at her mother with barely contained excitement. The business partners, Harold Patterson and two others I'd later learn, were James Morrison from a freight company and David Chen from an investment group, were deep in conversation with my father about shipping routes and quarterly projections. I looked at all of them and felt a familiar ache settle in my chest. If I made a scene tonight, I would lose this. All of it. The grandparents I loved. The chance to ever know my siblings as actual people. The fantasy that maybe, someday, this family could feel like home. But if I stayed silent, if I let them do whatever they were planning and just took it, I would lose something else, something harder to name. My mother's words echoed, "Don't let anyone make you forget who you are." The problem was I wasn't sure I remembered. Then my father stood up, and the room fell silent. "Before we eat," he announced, "I have something important to address." My father had a talent for commanding a room. He'd stand just so, shoulders back, chin lifted, one hand casually holding his scotch, and somehow make everyone else feel like they were auditioning for his approval. "First," he said, gesturing expansively, "I want to thank everyone for being here. Family is everything." Victoria smiled adoringly. Sophia nodded. The business partners raised their glasses. "I'd like to introduce our distinguished guests." He turned to the three men. "Harold Patterson, Vice President at First Harbor Bank, the institution that's helped Hartley Maritime expand into new markets." Harold inclined his head. "James Morrison, whose freight operation has been an invaluable partner, and David Chen, who's exploring some exciting investment opportunities with us." Each man received a handshake, a personal anecdote, a moment in the spotlight. Then my father began introducing family. "My beautiful wife Victoria, who also serves as CFO of Hartley Maritime. She keeps me honest." Laughter. "My son Ethan, currently pursuing his MBA at Wharton. We're grooming him for great things." Ethan gave a modest wave. "And my daughter Sophia, who'll be joining the company next year in operations." He was working his way around the table. My turn was coming. When he reached me, he paused. The pause stretched a beat too long. "And this is Diana, my daughter from before." That was it. No Harvard, no law career, no accomplishments, just before. Harold Patterson looked at me with that same curious expression I'd noticed earlier. His brow furrowed slightly, like he was filing away information. "Diana," my father continued, already moving on, "is based in Boston. She does legal work." Legal work. Like I filed paperwork at a strip mall office. I kept my face neutral. 20 years of practice. But inside, something was starting to crack. Dinner proceeded in courses: butternut squash soup, Caesar salad, the turkey, golden and enormous, presiding over the table like a sacrificial offering. Victoria waited until the main course to strike. "So, Diana," she dabbed her lips with her napkin, "I hear you're still at that little firm in Boston, Mitchell and—" what was it? "Mitchell and Associates." "Right, right." She tilted her head sympathetically. "It must be hard working at a smaller practice, not quite the same resources as the big firms." I kept my voice steady. "We handle significant transactions. Last quarter, I closed a $28 million acquisition." $28 million. Victoria's eyebrows rose, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "That's sweet. Of course, Richard works with Morrison and Sterling, top 20 in the Northeast. Now that's a real legal powerhouse." I felt my jaw tighten. "Morrison and Sterling is very well regarded. Their senior partner is incredible," Victoria continued, warming to her subject. "What's the name, Richard? The one who handles all our maritime contracts?" My father waved his hand without looking up from his plate. "Whitmore something. E. Whitmore. Never met them personally. That's what the legal department is for." Whitmore. The word hit me like ice water. E. Whitmore. My mother's name. Eleanor Whitmore. I felt the blood drain from my face. Every nerve in my body went rigid. It couldn't be. There was no way. But even as I thought it, pieces were clicking into place. The files on my mother's desk, the maritime cases she mentioned in passing, the late nights, year after year, working on shipping contracts. Victoria was still talking. "Anyway, Diana, I'm sure your little firm is fine for what you do. Not everyone can work with the best." I forced a smile. "No, not everyone can." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear. The meal continued. Conversations rose and fell. I pushed food around my plate, tasting nothing. E. Whitmore, Morrison and Sterling, Hartley Maritime. My mother had been my father's lawyer for 15 years, and he didn't even know. The irony was almost too perfect. The woman he called his biggest mistake had been protecting his fortune this entire time. He'd trusted her with contracts worth tens of millions of dollars, signed documents she'd drafted, built his empire on the legal framework she'd constructed, and he had no idea. I was still processing this when the dessert plates were cleared, and my father stood again. The room quieted instantly. "Before we finish," he announced, "I have one more piece of business to address." Victoria straightened in her chair, eyes gleaming. Sophia bit her lip to contain her smile. "Diana," my father's gaze locked onto me. "Would you come here, please?" 23 pairs of eyes turned in my direction. I felt like a defendant being summoned to the stand. I rose slowly. My legs felt wooden as I walked toward him. "Yes?" He reached into his suit jacket and withdrew a white envelope. Heavy, official-looking. "This," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "is something I've been meaning to do for a long time." He placed the envelope in my hands. "Open it." I did. Inside was a stack of legal documents. I scanned the first page quickly, years of training kicking in despite the adrenaline flooding my system. It was a waiver, a renunciation of all claims to any assets, inheritance, or property connected to the first marital union of Richard Hartley. My hands went cold. "What is this?" My voice came out steady. "Barely." My father smiled. It was the smile of a man about to deliver a punchline he'd been rehearsing for months. "Your mother," my father said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "was the biggest mistake of my life." He paused, letting the words land. "This," he tapped the papers in my hands, "is how I'm finally correcting it. Sign this, and we can all move on. Clean break. No more loose ends from that unfortunate chapter." Someone laughed. Then someone else. Victoria's hand covered her mouth in mock surprise. Sophia didn't bother hiding her grin. I looked around the room. Cousin Marcus was smirking. Aunt Patricia nodded approvingly. The business partners exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. Even Ethan, my half-brother, the one I'd hoped might be different, just stared at his phone. Only two people weren't laughing. Grandpa Harold's face had gone pale. Grandma Margaret pressed her hand to her chest. And Harold Patterson, the banker, was watching me with an expression I couldn't read, something between curiosity and concern. "Well," my father's voice sharpened, "are you going to sign, or are you going to make a scene? You know how your mother loved making scenes." I looked down at the papers. The legal language was clear enough. This document would strip me of any theoretical claim to anything my father owned. Not that I'd ever expected an inheritance. Not that I'd ever asked for one. But that wasn't the point, was it? The point was humiliation. Public. Deliberate. Designed to break me in front of everyone he wanted to impress. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a pen. My father's smile widened. He thought he'd won. "Smart girl. Just like your mother. Knows when she's beaten." I uncapped the pen. Signed my name. Slowly. Clearly. Each letter deliberate. Then I set the papers on the table. "There," I said quietly. "It's done." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't give him the satisfaction. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The moment I set the pen down, Victoria pounced. "Well done, Diana." Her voice dripped with satisfaction. "Finally being reasonable. I always knew you'd come around eventually." Sophia clapped her hands once, twice. "This calls for champagne." But not everyone was celebrating. "Richard," Grandpa Harold's voice cut through the noise. "This is Thanksgiving. This is supposed to be family." "It is family, Dad." My father didn't even look at him. "My family. I'm just cleaning up old messes." "That's your daughter you're talking about." "That's the daughter of a woman who nearly ruined my life." Richard's jaw tightened. "Now it's done. Let's move on." Grandma Margaret reached across the table toward me, her eyes wet. "Diana, sweetheart." I managed a small nod. I couldn't speak. Not yet. And then I noticed Harold Patterson. The banker had pushed back his chair. His face was unreadable, but his body language had changed completely. Stiff, alert. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "I need to make a phone call." He walked out of the dining room without waiting for a response. No one else seemed to notice. Victoria was already refilling wine glasses. Richard was accepting congratulations from David Chen. Sophia was taking a selfie. But I noticed. I didn't know who Harold Patterson was calling. I didn't know what he'd heard that made him leave so abruptly. But something in my gut told me it mattered. Ethan finally looked up from his phone. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. He looked away first. I don't know what I expected from him. A word of support? A flicker of discomfort? Something human? I got nothing. Fine. Excuse me, I said. I need some air. I walked out of that room with my head high. I had a phone call of my own to make. The night air was cold, sharp. I welcomed it. I walked past the perfectly trimmed hedges, past the three-car garage, past the stone fountain that had cost more than my first year's salary. I stopped near the property line, where the landscape lighting didn't reach. My hands were shaking as I dialed. She answered on the first ring. Diana? Mom. My voice cracked. He made me sign papers, in front of everyone. He said you were his biggest mistake and he was correcting it. Silence. Then, are you okay? I don't know. I signed them. I signed them. Good. I blinked. Good? Mom, he humiliated me in front of Diana. Her voice was calm, impossibly calm. Those papers are legally worthless. You know that. Any first-year law student could tell you that a waiver signed under duress, without independent counsel, with witnesses to the coercion, wouldn't hold up for 30 seconds in court. She was right. I knew she was right. I was a lawyer. I should have seen it immediately. But that's not why you're calling, she continued. Something else happened. I took a breath. Victoria mentioned Morrison and Sterling. She mentioned a senior partner named Whitmore, E. Whitmore. The silence that followed was different, heavier. Mom, is that you? Yes. The word hung in the air. I've been lead counsel on Hartley Maritime's account since 2009, she said quietly. Every major contract, the fleet acquisition in 2010, the Singapore expansion in 2023, the $45 million loan with First Harbor Bank in 2018, all of it. He doesn't know? He never asked. He never read the full names on the documents. He just trusted that Morrison and Sterling was the best. A pause. He trusted me, Diana. He just never knew it was me. Why? My voice was barely a whisper. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell anyone? Because it wasn't about revenge. My mother's voice was steady, the way it always was when she was explaining something important. After the divorce, I focused on building my career. Morrison and Sterling recruited me in 2008. A year later, Hartley Maritime became a client. By then, I was the firm's maritime specialist. But you could have… What? Refused the account? Used my position to hurt him? She sighed. Diana, I'm a professional. Your father needed competent legal counsel, and I provided it. That's my job. I don't let personal history interfere with professional obligations. I leaned against a cold stone pillar, trying to process. For 15 years, I said slowly, you've been the person keeping his company legally protected. The contracts, the loans, the expansions, all drafted or reviewed by me. Yes. And he spent those same 15 years calling you a failure, telling everyone you were worthless, teaching me to be ashamed of you. Yes. No bitterness in her voice, just fact. So why now? Why are you telling me now? Because you asked. Her voice softened. And because tonight, Richard crossed a line. He didn't just insult me. He humiliated you, my daughter, in public, in front of business partners and family. I heard her take a breath. I've waited 15 years to see if he would change. Tonight, he answered that question. And now, a pause. If you want me to stay out of it, I will. This is your choice. But if you want to show Richard exactly who he's been depending on all these years, I'm ready. The cold air stung my lungs. What do you mean, ready? I mean, I've kept very good records, Diana, very good records. If you're still watching, I want to hear from you. Maybe you've been in a situation like this, where someone in your own family made you feel like you were nothing. If that's you, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if you want to find out what happened when my father discovered the truth, hit subscribe and keep watching. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. I stood in the darkness for a long moment after I hung up. My mother's words echoed in my head. Very good records. I thought about what would happen if I walked back inside, retrieved my coat, and drove back to Boston. By tomorrow, this would become another story Richard told at cocktail parties. How his first wife's daughter had finally accepted her place, signed the papers, and disappeared like a good girl. He'd win. Again. I thought about the papers I'd signed. Worthless, legally. But symbolically, they meant everything to him. They were his final victory over my mother, over me, over the mistake he'd been trying to erase for 2 decades. And I thought about Harold Patterson walking out of that dining room with his phone in his hand. Something was happening that Richard didn't control. I took a breath of cold Connecticut air, then another. Then I walked back inside. Victoria spotted me immediately. Back so soon? I thought you'd run off to cry somewhere. No, I said evenly. I was making a phone call. To whom? Your mother? She laughed. What could she possibly do? More than you'd think. Victoria's smile faltered for just a second. My father was refilling his scotch at the sideboard. He looked up when I approached. Diana, I hope you're not going to make this awkward. What's done is done. I'm not making anything awkward. I kept my voice calm, professional. I just have a question. What? Your law firm, Morrison and Sterling, the senior partner who handles your maritime accounts. E. Whitmore. I paused. Do you know their full name? Richard's glass stopped halfway to his lips. What? E. Whitmore, the attorney who's protected your company for 15 years. Do you know who that is? The blood drained from my father's face. What are you talking about? I'm talking about your legal counsel. I kept my tone measured, factual, the way I would in a deposition. The partner at Morrison and Sterling who drafted your fleet acquisition contract in 2010, the loan agreement with First Harbor Bank in 2018, the Singapore expansion deal last year. That's firm business. I don't deal with the individual attorneys. No, you don't. You just sign what they send you. I tilted my head. E. Whitmore, Dad. Eleanor Whitmore. The glass of scotch trembled in his hand. That's not possible. It's very possible. Mom has been the senior partner on your account for 15 years. She's written every major contract that's kept Hartley Maritime solvent. Victoria's voice cut in, shrill. Richard, she's lying. She's obviously lying. That woman can't be. I'm not lying. I turned to face her. You can verify it yourself. Call the firm. Ask for E. Whitmore's full credentials. Or. I glanced toward the doorway where Harold Patterson had just reappeared. You could ask Mr. Patterson. I'm guessing he already knows. Every head in the room swiveled toward the banker. Harold Patterson stepped forward slowly. His expression was grim. Richard, we need to talk. Harold, this is a family matter. No. Patterson's voice was flat. It stopped being a family matter when you publicly defamed your company's lead counsel in front of me. He pulled out his phone, showing a text message. I just confirmed with Morrison and Sterling. Eleanor Whitmore has been your primary attorney for 15 years. She personally structured your loan with our bank. The room had gone dead silent. My father looked like a man watching his own execution. That can't, his voice cracked. She wouldn't. She did, I said. And you never even noticed. Victoria couldn't help herself. Even watching her husband's face turn gray, she couldn't resist. This is ridiculous. She stepped forward, positioning herself between Richard and me. Harold, you can't seriously believe this girl. Her mother was a nobody, a housewife Richard supported for years. She couldn't possibly be a senior partner at Morrison and Sterling. Harold Patterson's expression remained unchanged. Mrs. Hartley, Eleanor Whitmore is not a nobody. She's one of the most respected M&A attorneys in the Northeast. She has over 20 years of experience in corporate law and maritime regulations. Her firm bio lists her as the lead on over 40 major acquisitions, totaling more than $2 billion. Victoria's mouth opened, closed, opened again. But Richard told me. What Richard told you, I said quietly, was a story he wanted to believe, not the truth. Harold turned to my father. His voice was cold. Richard, do you understand what just happened here? You publicly defamed the attorney who structured your $45 million loan agreement with our bank. In front of me, in front of witnesses. Harold, I didn't know. You also pressured your own daughter, also an attorney, I've just learned, to sign legal documents under duress. Patterson shook his head. Do you remember the character clause in your loan agreement? Section 14.3? My father's face went from gray to white. The character clause states that any conduct by company leadership that materially damages the firm's reputation or legal standing triggers a covenant review. Patterson's voice was clipped. I'd say publicly calling your own legal counsel a mistake and a failure qualifies. James Morrison, the freight partner, quietly pushed back his chair. Richard, I think we need to postpone our discussion about the expansion contract. The dominoes were starting to fall, and we were just getting started. My father's composure shattered. Harold, wait! He grabbed the banker's arm. This was a family misunderstanding. It has nothing to do with the company. It has everything to do with the company. Patterson pulled his arm free. You just demonstrated, in front of 3 business partners, that you don't know who your own legal counsel is, that you make major decisions based on assumptions rather than facts, that you publicly attack the professionals who protect your interests. I can fix this. Can you? Patterson's eyebrows rose. Because from where I'm standing, you just revealed yourself as either incompetent or reckless. Neither is reassuring to someone who's extended you $45 million in credit. David Chen stepped forward. Richard, I think we should table the investment discussion until things settle. David, please. I'm sorry, Richard. Chen was already reaching for his coat. But this is a lot to process. Let's talk next quarter. James Morrison nodded. I'll have my team reach out about the expansion contract. We'll need to reassess the timeline. The 3 men were leaving, walking out of my father's showcase dinner, past his $4 million house, away from his carefully constructed image of success, and there was nothing he could do to stop them. Victoria turned on me, her face twisted with fury. This is your fault. You planned this. I didn't plan anything. I met her gaze steadily. I just answered a question. You ruined everything. No, Victoria. My voice was calm, eerily calm. Richard ruined everything. 15 years ago when he decided to treat my mother like garbage. Tonight when he decided to humiliate me for sport. I didn't ruin anything. I just turned on the lights. My father's phone started buzzing. The screen lit up with the caller ID, Morrison and Sterling LLP. He stared at it like it was a live grenade. Answer it, I said. My father's hand shook as he picked up the phone. He pressed the speaker button, probably without thinking, his mind too scrambled to remember there were still a dozen people in the room. Richard Hartley speaking. Good evening, Richard. My mother's voice filled the room. Calm, measured, professional. This is Eleanor Whitmore, senior partner at Morrison and Sterling. I'm calling regarding the Hartley Maritime account. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Victoria stopped breathing. Eleanor. My father's voice cracked on her name. How? I didn't. I've been informed of an incident at your residence this evening, she continued, as if he hadn't spoken. Harold Patterson contacted our firm to report that you made several defamatory statements about your lead counsel in public, in front of witnesses. That was a mistake. I didn't know. You didn't know that your legal representation for the past 15 years was handled by your ex-wife? A pause. That's precisely the problem, Richard. You didn't know, because you never asked. You never read the engagement letters. You never attended the annual account reviews. You signed whatever was put in front of you and assumed someone else had done the work. My father sank into a chair. The hand holding his phone was trembling. What do you want? I want nothing from you. This call is to inform you that Morrison and Sterling will be conducting an internal review of our relationship with Hartley Maritime. Given tonight's events, we have concerns about continuing to represent a client whose leadership publicly disparages our partners. Victoria lunged forward. You can't do that. We'll sue. Mrs. Hartley. My mother's voice turned to ice. I am an attorney. Please don't threaten me with lawsuits. It's embarrassing for both of us. Even I had to admire that one. My father was still holding the phone when I stepped forward. I have something to say. Every face turned toward me. My grandparents, my aunt and uncle, my cousins, my half-siblings, and my father, all of them watching. Dad, I used the word deliberately. I've been silent for 15 years. I accepted being called the daughter from before. I accepted being compared to Ethan and Sophia and found lacking. I accepted being ignored at graduation, dismissed at dinners, treated like an inconvenience you couldn't quite shake. My voice was steady. The years of courtroom training, of presentations to hostile boardrooms, of holding myself together when everything wanted to fall apart, all of it was paying off now. I accepted all of that because I thought maybe if I was good enough, quiet enough, successful enough, you would finally see me, finally love me the way you love them. I gestured toward Ethan and Sophia, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. But tonight, you showed me the truth. It was never about what I did or didn't do. It was about what I represent. A marriage you regret. A life you want to forget. A woman you couldn't control. I took a breath. So here's what happens now. That document I signed? It's legally worthless. Any judge would throw it out in 30 seconds. I signed it because I wanted to see how far you would go. My father's mouth opened. Nothing came out. You went all the way, I continued. So now I'm setting a boundary. I don't need your inheritance, I don't need your approval, and I don't need to keep showing up to be humiliated. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair. From now on, you'll have to find someone else to be your mistake. The aftermath was immediate. Grandpa Harold rose from his chair. He was 82 years old, and his knees gave him trouble, but he stood anyway. Diana. His voice was thick. I should have said something years ago. I watched how they treated you, and I stayed quiet because I didn't want to cause problems. He shook his head. That was wrong. I'm sorry. Grandma Margaret was crying. You're always welcome at our home, sweetheart. Always. This house. She looked around with something like disgust. This isn't family. This is theater. I felt my throat tighten. Thank you, Grandma. Ethan finally put down his phone. He looked at me. Really looked at me. Maybe for the first time in years. Diana, he swallowed. I didn't know it was this bad. I just thought, I don't know what I thought. I'm sorry. It wasn't much, but it was something. Sophia hadn't moved. Her face was red, her eyes fixed on the floor. No apology from her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And Victoria was staring at Richard with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something worse. Realization. You told me she was nothing, Victoria said slowly. You said she was a failure, a housewife who couldn't even keep you happy, and the whole time she was the one keeping this company alive? Victoria, I didn't know. How could you not know? Her voice rose. How could you not know who was writing your contracts for 15 years? I trusted the firm. You trusted a name without ever checking who was behind it. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. God. And I thought I knew who I married. The perfect family was cracking, and I hadn't even done anything. The truth had done it all by itself. I drove back to Boston that night. I didn't sleep. By 9 o'clock the next morning, November 29th, 2024, my phone was already buzzing with news. First, a text from my mother. First Harbor Bank has initiated a covenant review. They sent formal notice to Hartley Maritime 30 minutes ago. Then a forwarded email from Marcus Webb, Mom's colleague at Morrison and Sterling. Subject line: Re. Loan Agreement, NUD FHB 2018-4523. Notice of Covenant Review. I opened it. The language was formal, bureaucratic, devastating. Dear Mr. Hartley, pursuant to Section 14.3 of the loan agreement dated March 15, 2018, First Harbor Bank hereby exercises its right to initiate a comprehensive review of all covenant provisions. This action is taken in response to circumstances that may materially affect the character and reputation clauses contained therein. You are required to submit updated financial documentation, governance records, and character references within 90 days. Failure to satisfy the bank's review requirements may result in acceleration of the loan or modification of terms. I read it twice, then a third time. Section 14.3, the character clause. Harold Patterson hadn't been bluffing. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. Connecticut Business Journal. Hartley Maritime faces legal shakeup amid leadership questions. The article was short, clearly rushed to publication, but the headline alone was damaging enough. Sources report that Hartley Maritime Logistics, the Greenwich-based shipping firm, has unexpectedly parted ways with its longtime legal counsel. Industry insiders suggest the change may be connected to internal governance concerns, though representatives for the company declined to comment. 24 hours. That's all it had taken. One Thanksgiving dinner, one public humiliation, one woman who'd been underestimated for 15 years. And now the dominoes were falling. December 2nd, 2024. 4 days after Thanksgiving. Morrison and Sterling sent their official notice of termination. I saw the letter because my mother showed it to me. Not to gloat, that wasn't her style, but because she wanted me to understand that this wasn't personal. It was professional. Dear Mr. Hartley, after careful consideration by our partnership committee, Morrison and Sterling LLP has determined that we must terminate our representation of Hartley Maritime Logistics, effective immediately. This decision is based on irreconcilable conflicts of interest and a fundamental breakdown in the attorney-client relationship. As you are aware, the events of November 28th have created circumstances that make continued representation untenable. We will cooperate fully with any successor counsel to ensure a smooth transition. All pending matters will be transferred in accordance with professional responsibility guidelines. We wish you well in your future endeavors. The letter was signed by the managing partner. Below his signature was another name, E. Whitmore, senior partner. I didn't ask them to fire him, my mother said when we talked that afternoon. I reported what happened to the ethics committee because I was required to. The partnership voted unanimously to terminate. Because of what he said about you? Because of what he revealed about himself? She paused. A client who publicly attacks his own legal counsel demonstrates poor judgment. A client who doesn't know who his legal counsel is demonstrates negligence. The firm decided the reputational risk wasn't worth 40 years of billings. I thought about that. 40 years of billings, millions of dollars in legal fees. Gone. Has he tried to hire another firm? He's approached two, both declined. A small, dry laugh. Apparently the story has made the rounds. No one wants to be Richard Hartley's next lawyer. Justice, it turned out, had a way of finding its own level. The business fallout continued through December. James Morrison's freight company sent a formal letter on December 5th. The $12 million expansion contract that had been nearly finalized was now postponed indefinitely, pending review of partnership alignment. Translation: they didn't trust Richard anymore. The Singapore partner, Trang Logistics, requested an emergency video conference. According to my mother's sources, they demanded information about Hartley Maritime's governance structure and leadership stability. The call did not go well. On December 10th, the Greenwich Business Association quietly announced that Richard Hartley's nomination for their board of directors had been withdrawn by mutual agreement. The press release used words like scheduling conflicts and other commitments, but everyone in Greenwich knew what it meant. Richard Hartley was no longer welcome at the table. The country club was subtler. They simply didn't renew his membership when it came up in January. No explanation given. None needed. I kept track of the numbers because numbers tell the truth when people won't. $3.2 million. Estimated additional legal costs for Hartley Maritime to hire new counsel and restructure existing contracts. $12 million. Value of the Morrison freight deal that evaporated. 1.5%. Increase in interest rate when First Harbor Bank concluded their review and adjusted terms on the loan. 0. The number of times Richard Hartley called me to apologize. But he did call, 7 times in the first 2 weeks. I didn't answer. He texted once. "We need to talk. About the company, I need your help." I responded, "You don't need me. You need a good lawyer. I'm sure Morrison and Sterling can recommend someone." Then I blocked his number. It wasn't revenge. It was boundary. There's a difference. Okay, quick check-in. If you've made it this far and you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button. And tell me in the comments, do you think Richard deserved what happened, or was it too harsh? I really want to know what you think. Also, stay tuned because what happened to Victoria might be the most satisfying part of this whole story. Victoria's downfall was almost poetic. When First Harbor Bank initiated their covenant review, they requested comprehensive financial documentation. Every quarterly report, every projection, every internal memo had to be examined. That's when the problems emerged. Victoria had been CFO in title for 8 years. In practice, she'd been a figurehead. The actual financial work was done by a team of accountants and analysts who reported to her but rarely involved her in decision-making. She signed what they prepared. She presented what they wrote. She took credit for results she didn't understand. It wasn't fraud, nothing criminal, nothing actionable. Just incompetence dressed up in designer suits and confident smiles. The bank's auditors found inconsistencies in 3 years of quarterly reports. Minor errors mostly, decimal points in wrong places, projections that didn't match underlying data. Nothing that would sink a company, but enough to raise questions. Their recommendation was clear. Hartley Maritime needed a CFO with verifiable financial credentials and demonstrated competency. Victoria had a bachelor's degree in art history from a small college in Connecticut. Her only financial qualification was being married to the CEO. The board, what was left of it after the Thanksgiving disaster, gave Richard an ultimatum: replace Victoria as CFO or face a vote of no confidence. On January 15, 2025, Victoria Hartley was transitioned to a strategic advisory role. The announcement was carefully worded, full of praise for her years of service and invaluable contributions. Everyone knew what it meant. The woman who'd spent 15 years telling me my mother was worthless had just been exposed as exactly what she'd accused my mother of being: unqualified, incompetent, and holding a position she hadn't earned. The irony was not lost on me. I didn't celebrate. But I didn't cry for her either. Richard tried everything. After I blocked his number, he started calling my office. My assistant, Sarah, handled it beautifully. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hartley. Diana is in a meeting." "I'm sorry, Mr. Hartley. Diana is with a client." "I'm sorry, Mr. Hartley. Diana has asked me to direct all family inquiries to her personal email." He never emailed. That would have created a written record, and even Richard wasn't that foolish. He sent Ethan as an intermediary. My half-brother showed up at my apartment building one evening in late December looking uncomfortable. Dad asked me to talk to you. What does he want? He says he needs to speak with you. About the company. About everything. I leaned against my doorframe. Does he want to apologize? Ethan hesitated. He said he wants to clear the air. That's not an apology. I know. Ethan looked at his shoes. Diana, I'm not here as his messenger. I mean, I am, but… He stopped, started again. I wanted to apologize. For myself. For all the times I didn't notice what was happening, or noticed and didn't say anything. I studied my half-brother. 28 years old. Privileged his entire life. Never had to fight for anything. But he was here. That meant something. Thank you, I said. That actually matters. Can we get coffee sometime? Just us? No agenda, no dad stuff. I'd like to, I don't know, be better. I considered it. Text me. We'll figure something out. He nodded, looking relieved. But Ethan, tell Dad this. I'm not interested in clearing the air. When he's ready to apologize for what he did, not for the consequences, he can write me a letter. A real one. Until then, my door is closed. It stayed closed. By February 2025, the full accounting was clear. Hartley Maritime still existed. I wasn't trying to destroy my father's company, but it had been fundamentally diminished. The $45 million loan was restructured with a 1.5% interest increase and additional oversight requirements. Over the remaining 7 years of the loan, that translated to approximately $2.3 million in additional interest payments. Legal costs for transitioning to new counsel and restructuring existing contracts totaled $3.2 million. The Morrison Freight Partnership, $12 million in projected revenue, was gone. 3 other smaller partnerships had paused their expansions with Hartley Maritime, waiting to see how things stabilized. But the personal losses mattered more. Richard was forced to step down as CEO in late January. The board, rattled by the bank's scrutiny and the exodus of partners, demanded fresh leadership. He retained the title of chairman, which meant he still had a seat at the table, but the day-to-day control he'd wielded for 25 years was gone. Ethan was promoted to COO as part of succession planning. My half-brother was suddenly learning what it meant to actually run a company, not just talk about it at Wharton. And my grandparents, the only part of that family I truly cared about, made their position clear. Grandpa Harold called me 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. I talked to my attorney, he said. I'm revising my will. Your father's portion is being converted into an educational trust for you, Ethan, and Sophia. He'll have no control over how it's distributed. Grandpa, you don't have to… I want to, he interrupted. I should have stood up for you years ago. This is the least I can do. $1.8 million. Not for me specifically, split 3 ways among us grandchildren. But the message was unmistakable. Actions have consequences, even for family. Ethan and I had coffee in early March. He picked a small cafe in Cambridge, away from anyone who might recognize him. Smart choice. I've been thinking a lot since Thanksgiving, he said, both hands wrapped around his cup like he needed something to hold on to. About you. About Mom. About Eleanor. About how things were. And? And I was an asshole. He said it flatly, like he'd practiced. Not actively, maybe, but I never questioned anything. Dad said your mom was a failure, so I believed him. Dad treated you like an afterthought, so I treated you like one too. I never once asked myself if any of it was true. I let him sit with that for a moment. What changed? Finding out that everything I believed was wrong. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. The woman Dad called worthless built his company. The daughter he dismissed as unimportant saw through his bullshit when no one else did. It made me realize I don't actually know anything. I just accepted whatever version of reality was most comfortable. I sipped my coffee, let the silence stretch. So what now? Now I'm trying to do better. He met my eyes. I'm not asking you to forgive Dad. I'm not asking you to come back to family dinners. I just, I'd like to have a sister. A real relationship, not the fake one we've been pretending to have for 30 years. That's going to take time. I know. And I'm not going to pretend the past didn't happen. I'm not asking you to. He paused. I'm just asking for a chance to earn something real. I thought about it. About what forgiveness meant. About what it didn't. Okay, I said finally. Let's see where it goes. It was a start. I visited my mother in New York at the end of March. Her apartment was exactly how I remembered it, warm, lived in, filled with books and soft lighting. The opposite of my father's Greenwich showcase. We sat in her living room with cups of tea, watching the city lights through her window. Can I ask you something? Always. Why did you wait so long? You could have exposed him years ago. You had everything you needed. My mother was quiet for a moment, turning her cup in her hands. Because it wasn't my choice to make, she said finally. You were still trying to have a relationship with your father. I didn't want to be the one who destroyed that. If there was ever going to be a reckoning, it needed to come from you, when you were ready, on your terms. But you kept working for him the whole time. I kept doing my job, she smiled slightly. That's different. Richard needed legal protection. I provided it. My personal feelings didn't change my professional obligations. Weren't you angry? For a long time, yes. She set down her cup. I spent years being angry. Then I realized anger is just handing someone else control of your life, so I stopped. I focused on my career, on raising you, on becoming good at what I do. That was my revenge, if you want to call it that. Living well. And Thanksgiving? Thanksgiving was Richard's choice. Her voice hardened slightly. He decided to attack you in public, to use me as a weapon against my own daughter. That crossed a line I'd been careful never to cross myself. So you were ready. I was always ready. She reached over and squeezed my hand. I was just waiting for you to be ready too. In February 2025, I was promoted to senior associate at Mitchell & Associates. It wasn't because of what happened with my father. My bosses didn't even know the details. It was because I'd earned it. 5 years of solid work, 12 successful transactions, clients who returned and referred others. My first major case in the new role was a $28 million acquisition for a biotech firm. Months of due diligence, negotiation, drafting, the kind of complex, high-stakes work I'd been training for my entire career. We closed the deal on April 15th. The client sent flowers to my office. Marcus Webb, my mother's colleague at Morrison and Sterling, started sending referrals my way. Small matters at first, things too minor for a top 20 firm, but perfect for someone building a reputation. Each one was a vote of confidence. I also started pro bono work with a nonprofit that helped women rebuild careers after divorce. Once a month, I gave workshops on financial literacy and legal rights, basic stuff, understanding contracts, protecting assets, knowing when to call a lawyer. My mother came to one of the sessions. Afterward, she said, "You're good at this." At what? At helping people see their own value. She smiled. Wonder where you learned that? I knew the answer, of course. I'd learned it from her. From watching her build a life out of wreckage, refuse to be defined by someone else's narrative, show up every day and do the work. I'd also learned it from myself, from 15 years of being told I wasn't enough and finally deciding to stop believing it. My father taught me what not to be. My mother taught me what was possible. The rest, the hardest part, I had to figure out on my own. But I had. Finally, I had. As of this recording, my father is still alive, still wealthy, relatively speaking, still living in the Greenwich house with Victoria. But he's not the same man he was a year ago. Hartley Maritime continues to operate, though it's no longer considered a leader in the regional logistics market. The new CEO, an outsider hired by the board, has stabilized things, but growth has stalled. Industry publications describe the company as in transition. Richard attends board meetings as chairman, but those who've seen him say he's diminished, quieter, less certain. The confidence that once filled every room he entered has faded into something more cautious. Victoria stayed with him. I don't know if that's loyalty, convenience, or the simple calculation that divorce would be more expensive than endurance. They're not a happy couple. According to Ethan, they barely speak. He never sent me that letter. The apology I asked for, not for consequences but for actions, never came. Maybe he doesn't believe he did anything wrong. Maybe he can't admit it, even to himself. I've made peace with that. I used to think I needed his acknowledgement to move forward, that some part of me would always be frozen in that moment at Thanksgiving, waiting for the validation he'd never give. But I was wrong. Validation doesn't come from people who can't see you. It comes from yourself, from knowing what you're worth even when others don't, from building a life that reflects your values, not their limitations. My father is a cautionary tale now, a man who had everything and burned it down because he couldn't control his contempt. I'm not his story. I never was. I'm my own. And that's enough. That's always been enough. I just had to learn to believe it. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to tell you something. Not as a lawyer, not as someone who got a dramatic Thanksgiving victory. Just as a person who spent 30 years trying to earn love from someone who wasn't capable of giving it. If you're in a family where you're constantly overlooked, dismissed, or made to feel like a burden, that's not your fault. It was never your fault. Some people can't love the way they should, and their failure doesn't reflect your worth. You don't have to prove yourself to people who've already decided you're not enough. That's not a battle you can win, because they're not judging you on reality. They're projecting their own limitations. Setting boundaries isn't betrayal. It's self-preservation. It's saying, I deserve better than this, and I'm no longer willing to accept less. That's not cruelty. That's respect. For yourself. And silence can be powerful, but only when you choose it. There's a difference between staying quiet because you're afraid and staying quiet because you're waiting for the right moment. I was silent for 15 years, and when I finally spoke, it mattered. But if I'd stayed silent forever, that would have been surrender. My mother taught me that living well is the best response to people who want you to fail. Not revenge. Revenge keeps you tied to them. But success, peace, a life built on your own terms, that's freedom. I don't hate my father. I don't wish him harm. I just don't need him anymore. And if you're watching this, wondering if you'll ever get to that place, where the people who hurt you no longer have power over how you feel, I promise you it's possible. It takes time, it takes work, but it's possible. You are enough, you always were. This year, Thanksgiving will be different. I'm going to New York to spend the holiday with my mother. We're going to cook together, her famous stuffing, my mediocre pie, and drink too much wine and watch terrible movies on her couch. No 24-person table, no business partners to impress, no papers to sign, just family. The family I chose. I've rebuilt my relationship with Ethan. It's not perfect, but it's real. We text. We grab dinner when he's in Boston. He's learning how to be a brother, and I'm learning how to let him try. Sophia still hasn't reached out. Maybe she will someday. Maybe she won't. I've stopped waiting. My grandparents call me every week. Grandma Margaret sends care packages with cookies I don't need but always eat. Grandpa Harold asks about my cases like they're the most interesting things in the world. And my mother is exactly who she's always been. Brilliant, steady, mine. My father said she was his biggest mistake. He was right about one thing. She was a turning point in his life, just not the way he meant. She turned into the woman who built his empire. I turned into the daughter who walked away from it. And neither of us looked back. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Share your own experience if you feel comfortable. Sometimes knowing you're not alone is the most powerful thing. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and check the description for more stories like this one. I'll see you in the next video. Take care of yourselves, you're worth it.